Yo, 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 yo. What is going on, COD Familia? It is your boy BN, aka Mr. Kingdom Builder. And today, I thought another topical discussion would be in order where we touch on, is it okay, is it acceptable for free-to-play players to be accepted into spending alliances? Now, this was a topic that we discussed in COD VC a number of days ago, and I thought it would be nice to expand on it and just kind of talk it out. And so, generally speaking, if we look, especially if we look at some recent data from the top 25 free-to-play players in the game, what we ended up seeing is that there was a few, right? Anywhere from one to a couple in some of the top spending alliances. Right, some names that come to mind for me would be Siggy over in TFS. Right, we end up having where's my thing here for personal. Right, here we go. So here, right, we have Snowball, who's in TA. You got Dre here, who's in NTS, Doremi and IL, right? This is some of the people that we had on the top 25. And you'll notice, for the most part, right, I mean, you have two, and bear in mind, this isn't a full comprehensive for the top, but I mean, even PTW is a pretty strong alliance, right? You could see two people here in the top 25 that's on that list. And then again, some other strong players as well throughout. I mean, heck, there's even someone in the war, someone, like I said, that was in TFS. I don't think is on the list because I didn't get their screenshots in time, but even someone like Snowball, right, who's in TA, again, right, playing since OG Kingdom 1 beta. But the overall point is that we are seeing that there are free-to-play players that are in spending alliances. Now, this to me kind of goes beyond just it being black or white. If you're generally asking, right, can free-to-play players play in what we would probably consider more to like be mid-high spending alliances? Sure, they could. Now, whether or not those players, will meet certain requirements, certain thresholds, as far as being strong enough, being active enough, being able to contribute in some way, even if they may not necessarily be able to do behemoth raids as an example, and that's just typically because in a mid-high spending alliance, usually it's players that are just farther along their progression or their development that either have a lot of maxed out or close to maxed out, if not maxed out, stats within certain areas such as heroes, artifacts, pets, etc., right, having higher VIP levels, things that are just going to help you out more in those raids, whether it's, trying to aim for, a world's best raid time on elite raids, right, for the leaderboard that I put out, if it's just trying to be able to grab the raid, the vanilla raid, and then going into the elite raid. And then there's also times where we've seen free-to-play players, like Snowball, when I interviewed him, said that he is able to participate in raids. And again, like with anything, really the greatest obstacle in a free-to-play player's way is time. And time being that because you're not going to spend, because you're opting, right, to not spend money, or even if you just can't spend money on the game, or maybe you just want to do it the free-to-play way. Time is always going to be your greatest adversary because you essentially have to always try to do your best to min-max, right, every day, every week, every month, every year, in order to get and be able to progress as efficiently and effectively as you can. And so then we get to this idea of, well, boss, what happens if there's some alliances that just will not allow free-to-play players into their alliance? Okay, I mean, so be it, right? It is what it is. There's always the chance that that may happen. Doesn't mean that it happens on purpose or in a direct way every single time for every alliance that exists in the game. But could there be a possibility of some alliances just saying, hey, we just only want to have players in here that are spend, or we'll bring everyone in and then we'll just kind of rotate people out if we end up getting more people in that are interested in spending? I mean, to be fair, this is a very common thing that happens in New Kingdoms, right? If you think about an alliance that is, let's say they're the number one, number two alliance. They're growing at a really good rate. They have players that are constantly reaching out that are looking to join up. If they get someone that, let's say you're starting out, you got someone who's 100,000 power, right? They're free to play. Then you have someone else who's already 1,000,000 power at that point, right? And it's clear they're spending. There is a chance, regardless of how high it may be, there is a chance that a leader at that time may just say, look, we're going to remove you for whatever it may be. And obviously there are kind of correct and incorrect ways of doing that, right? There's professional ways of doing it, and then there's amateurish ways of doing it. Or right and wrong ways of doing it, right? With how you factor in something like I often talk about, which is soft skills, right? The ability that you have to communicate and to speak to one another. And sometimes you'll just have leads or some leads that will just say, hey, we're going to remove you, right? You're just a little bit low power. And maybe that's it. Maybe they'll add on something where it's like, hey, you can go and join this alliance, and then they bring in the next strongest person. Some leads I've seen where, and I'm sure some of you have some interesting stories too, I've seen some leads where they'll just pop open the member list. I'll give you a great example here, right? They'll do this. They'll just pop open the member list, and they'll just go to the very bottom, right? They'll just look at all the R1s, and they'll just look at who's ever the lowest powered, right? So who's ever the lowest powered, they'll click on them, and I'm just giving an example here, but let's just say Skylar, right, and then it's kick. It's like dun dun dun, click, 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 and they're out. And then they're messaging the stronger person, like, okay, hey, go ahead and apply. We'll get you in. Again, this is a very common thing. This is not out of the realm of possibility or understanding for how the game can operate, especially if you're free to play. And sometimes it's just a matter, really what I find is just as a free to play, doing the best job that you can, right, to be on right, as consistently as you're able to. Not to say you need to be on as much as you're able to, but be on as consistently as you can every day, especially when you're starting. So that way you can try and do your best to get into at least an active alliance. Doesn't always necessarily mean it needs to be the top alliance. Obviously, if you're an individual or solo player, right, getting into an active alliance and then potentially climbing as high as you can, or that is within reason, can obviously help the more you work your way up. If you're in a kingdom that is not doing any balancing and it's just kind of a pyramid, right, ladder climbing structure where all the power is kind of disproportionate, but it's in a way where it's pyramiding up, right? And so that's something that, again, as a free to play, when it comes to you thinking, oh, well, do I need to get into this? Because there are some free-to-play players out there who probably think to themselves, oh, well, the only way I'm going to be able to do anything is if I get into an alliance that spends. It's not necessarily true. Really all that it happens, which is the same thing if you get into an alliance that doesn't spend. All that matters is that it's just your general rate of progression, right? Will you be able to get pass rewards? Will you be able to get behemoth rewards? Will you be able to get higher level villages? Will you be able to get higher access to higher level nodes? Right? All of these, right? Will you be able to get into an alliance that's completing consistently more Augerstone chapters, right? These are all the cumulative rewards and resources and materials that you're going to be able to get as long as you're in an active alliance that has a chance of making it to a final zone or participating in a lot of these areas. And so that's why I found it very interesting when we were talking about this, about how some spending alliances, right, or should free-to-play players be allowed in spending alliances, with just the way that it was worded. Because, like I said, some people will feel that, you know what, it's just maybe not the most ideal thing, and then others will say, oh, no, it's totally fine as long as we have spots, and or as long as those people stay consistent. I mean, don't get me wrong. The way that the game plays out when it comes, and bear in mind, this is very much for, I would argue, the 99.9% of kingdoms, alliances, and players. When you go into kingdoms, and I'm going to show this off, once home kingdoms are introduced, I'm really going to hammer a lot of these points home, and I'm going to be excited to do it, is that when you start looking at kingdoms, you will notice, right, that the majority of kingdoms are not aiming to really balance power out. It's not to say that it's not a good thing to do as much as it's not to say that it's a bad thing to do. What it says is that because of the way that kingdoms passively will almost build themselves by default, because of the fact that usually when you go into a kingdom, even if you have a jumper group that goes in there, or a new kingdom start group that goes in there, or if you don't, most of the time you're vying to try and strengthen your alliance as much as you can, which goes back to the previous point on that by doing this, there's always going to be a higher percentage chance that players that spend will be stronger and will be higher powered, and this is why it's more likely that those players will get accepted into higher alliances, usually, and this is why I say on average, right before someone who's a free-to-play. Now, bear in mind, if the number one, I'll just give an example, if the number one and number two alliances have already kind of hoarded, if you will, right, those players that spend, and maybe there's a few spots left, or you really start seeing the majority of contention that's happening for free-to-play in a third, fourth, and fifth alliance, right? That is just kind of almost normal in that situation, in those particular circumstances for those kingdoms, where that will play out the way it is. But I think, once again, it goes back to the overall main point, is the most important thing is just to be consistent, right? And it shouldn't be something, and it sucks to say this, but I hope it's not, which is for me maybe just kind of a blindly optimistic way of looking at it. But my hope is always that players will, that alliances won't just kick out players because they're a little bit low power. And as long as they're active, they're participating, they're contributing, they're donating, they're powering up, and they're socially engaged. I would very much rather have a player like that, in my opinion, and I know other leaders share these same sentiments as well that I have spoken to, not to say everyone does, but I know some that do, is that players will value that more so than they will someone who's disengaged, not really around a lot, doesn't really socialize, is kind of iffy on making it here, but they're okay doing it because they'll just take in a strong account. Right? To almost kind of inflate power, right? Maybe that person shows up for war, but beyond that, they're just kind of non-existent. And obviously, there's some levels to that as well. And again, I'm sure it comes off on a case-by-case basis. And I'd be curious, right? If you're someone who's a lead or an officer and you're watching this, right? Have you ever seen situations that have played out that way where you've seen an alliance that has taken a player, even if they're mainly just there for war, for fighting, if that, right, regardless if they're not doing anything else or not really participating, but alliances keep those players in? Or have you seen it the other way, where players will opt more, alliances maybe, or leads, right, management teams will opt more for players that are going to help out the holistic whole of the alliance in all areas, and not just kind of be, a kind of like a toggle on-off mercenary, so to speak, if you will. And yeah, so those things for me are always very fascinating and curious, again, because in this genre of kingdom builders, situations can play out a multitude of different ways, right? It's not as though things are always going to happen the same way. And, oftentimes, and that might be in a very interesting video when we talk about, leadership styles, but it is something that I always find very illuminating. Because there is this thing, and this is the last thing I'll leave you with, is that, even when you're leading, the different approaches that leaders have and how their influence is before they even decide to lead, whether it's from playing in alliances, being an officer, being a member, seeing how other people lead, and then kind of taking those things with them. If it's them leading for the first time and not really having an idea on what they're doing, kind of making choices that may have, maybe some negative ripples, right, in the long-term implications for how those will play out. So yeah, with that in mind, that's pretty much it. Hey, sweetie. With Lord Almighty, that's going to do it for me today. That's my middle child. Sweetie, let me see your Pikachu shirt. Yeah, look at this. She's got the Pika. Yeah, I know, oh Lord. Anyways, with that in mind, fam, that's going to do it for me. I hope you guys enjoy, as always. It's the start of the weekend for me, so going to be able to hopefully enjoy a nice Saturday. And yeah, let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. I always really enjoy these topical conversations that I hear from players, whether it be in voice calls, if it's in COD VC, if it's people that will just DM me and we'll have conversations, if it's things that I see in the official Discord and the Gen Chat. Because to me, I think these are really important to have a good understanding and always to have good conversations, to have good discussions and dialogues on, so we can hopefully come to a better understanding on, I guess just kind of seeing through everything, kind of illuminating, right, if you will, being transparent in these discussions and not just kind of having them sit on the back burner and not really being talked about. Okay, that's it for me. As always, until next time, I'll catch y'all later.